The coffee was cold, but I continued to hold the cup in my hands. The open veranda of my house overlooked the neat streets of Youngstown, where every lawn was mowed with precision. The sun had already risen high enough to warm the air to a comfortable temperature. 78 years old, and I still savor these moments of quiet every morning. My house wasn't the largest on the street, but I was proud of it. 2 stories high, with a spacious front porch and a manicured garden in the backyard, the result of 50 years as a civil engineer. Bridges I designed are still standing all over the state of Ohio. Some of them I visit occasionally, like old friends. From the living room wall, Martha from our wedding picture looked up at me. Her smile, which I remembered with every fiber of my being, had not faded over the years in the photo. 10 years had passed since cancer had taken her, and I still spoke to her every morning. "It's a quiet day, Martha. Maybe I'll do some gardening." The garden was my sanctuary. After I retired, I devoted a lot of time to it. Every bush, every flower had a story. Roses were Martha's favorite. Hydrangeas reminded me of the trip to New England for our 30th anniversary. The small goldfish pond was my latest project. The little bridge across it I designed myself, a scaled-down replication of my first serious work. I set down my cup and picked up my cane. It wasn't a necessity, just a handy support for days when my knee bothered more than usual. Old age spares no one, even those who have worked physically all their lives. The morning mail brought the usual array of bills and sales brochures. The financial statements from my investment advisor looked satisfactory. Over the years, I had managed to accumulate enough to not worry about money. Prudent investments and a modest lifestyle had provided me with a comfortable old age and a substantial inheritance for my family. Family. At that word, something clenched in my chest. Martha and I only had one daughter, Paige, and to be honest, my relationship with her had always been complicated. I remembered the day she was born, the moment those tiny fingers wrapped around my index finger. There seemed to be an unbreakable bond between us. But over the years, something went wrong. Perhaps I was too strict? Or was I working too hard, missing out on important moments in her life? Martha said I was too reserved with my feelings. Maybe Paige had never felt my love? The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. Howard, my neighbor and longtime friend, was inviting me over for a weekend barbecue. Howard was one of the few people I kept in regular contact with. A former financier who now served on the board of directors of a local bank, he shared my love of gardening and good whiskey. "Father's Day is coming up," Howard reminded me at the end of the conversation. "Is Paige planning anything?" I sighed. I hadn't heard anything. "You should call her, Curtis. Don't wait for her to remember." I knew he was right, but pride kept me from making the first move. The last time we'd seen each other was at Christmas, an awkward dinner during which Paige and her husband, Vernon, exchanged meaningful glances when I dropped my fork or forgot what the conversation was about. They thought I was old and infirm, though my doctor claimed I was in great shape for my age, both physically and mentally. The memory of Vernon brought a bitter chuckle. My brother-in-law, the bank branch manager, always in an expensive suit and a smug smile. I had once hoped he would be the son I never had. Instead, he looked at me as a burden who would, thankfully, soon make room and leave an inheritance. The only bright spot in the family relationship was my granddaughter Ashlyn. At 23, she inherited Martha's best traits of kindness and sincerity. We rarely saw each other, but her weekend calls were the only ones I really looked forward to. Immersed in my memories, I didn't notice how the time flew by. The phone rang again, and this time it was Paige. Her voice, as always, sounded a little strained, like talking to me was an unpleasant duty. "Hey, Dad. How are you?" "I'm fine, Paige. Did something happen?" A short pause. Why does something have to happen for me to call? I didn't say anything. We both knew she rarely called for nothing. "Vernon and I were thinking," she paused. It's Father's Day on Sunday, and we wanted to take you out to dinner. It was unexpected. Father's Day usually went the same way as most holidays, with a formal card and maybe a brief phone call. Really? I couldn't hide my surprise. Yeah, we're having a little, family celebration. Ashlyn's coming too. Something in her tone made me wary. Over the years, I'd learned to recognize when Paige wasn't telling me the truth, but the thought of seeing my granddaughter outweighed my suspicions. Of course I'll be there. Thank you for inviting me. Oh, that's great. 5 o'clock. And Daddy. Her voice got a little softer. You don't have to bring anything. After the call, I remained sitting on the veranda looking at my garden. Maybe I'd been too harsh in my assessment. Maybe Paige really did want to mend relationships. People change, and maybe it was time for reconciliation. The rest of the day passed with the usual chores. I trimmed the hedge, checked the mail, and made myself a simple dinner. In the evening, I sat in my office going over financial documents. From my days at work, I was used to keeping everything in perfect order. My will had been drawn up 3 years ago and needed to be revised. I planned to leave the bulk of my estate to Ashlyn, not because I didn't like Paige, but because I knew she and Vernon were already well off. They had a big house, which, by the way, I'd helped them buy with a down payment, 2 cars, and steady incomes. Ashlyn was just starting out, and I wanted to give her a good start. But something told me that Paige and Vernon had already planned my inheritance. A few times I'd noticed Vernon looking at my house appraisingly, as if he were figuring out how much I could get for it. Then one day, I overheard Paige discussing Dad's money with a friend on the phone. The next morning I met Frank, a neighbor from across the street, on his morning jog. He stopped to say hello while I was picking up the paper. "Getting ready for the big day?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What day?" "Father's Day is on Sunday. My kids have already sent gifts," he smiled. "The advantage of them living in other states, no mandatory dinners, just presents." I grinned. "And Paige took me out to dinner." Frank raised his eyebrows. "Really? That's unusual." "Why would you think that?" He hesitated. "It's just, I saw Vernon at the golf club last week. He was discussing some financial difficulties with someone. Pretty loud for a conversation like that. It was interesting. Vernon always gave the impression of a successful man with no financial problems." "Maybe it was work-related," I suggested, though my inner voice told me otherwise. "Maybe," Frank shrugged. "In any case, enjoy your family dinner. And happy Father's Day." Back at the house, I couldn't shake off a vague uneasiness. The sudden invitation, Vernon's possible financial problems, all added up to an unpleasant picture, but I decided to give them a chance. After all, this was my family, and I wanted to believe in the best. I walked over to Martha's picture. "What do you think, darling? Is it worth hoping for?" Her smile seemed to grow a little sadder. Martha always understood people better. She could see through the masks they wore. If she were here, she would know exactly what to expect from this invitation. The remaining days until Sunday passed in quiet anticipation. I cut my hair, gave my best suit to the cleaners, even bought a new tie. Despite all the doubts, part of me, that naive part of me that never gave up hope of restoring family ties, was excited about the upcoming dinner. Saturday night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts of tomorrow were mixed with memories. I remembered Paige as a little girl sitting on my lap while I read her stories, how she would come running to me with broken knees and I would comfort her. When did everything change? When did that wall of alienation grow between us? Maybe tomorrow will be the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, a day when old grudges will be forgotten and we'll be a real family again. Saturday morning was clear and warm. I woke up early, as I had gotten used to over decades of work. Old habits die hard, especially when you're in your 70s. My bedroom was flooded with sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. I allowed myself a few minutes to snuggle in bed before getting up and starting the day, which promised to be a busy one. Tomorrow was Father's Day, and I had unexpectedly received an invitation from Paige. Despite vague doubts, I decided that I should prepare for this visit properly. The first order of business was a gift for Ashlyn. The holiday may not be hers, but I always took advantage of any excuse to please my granddaughter. After breakfast, I headed into town. Youngstown, despite its industrial roots, had been transformed in recent years. The historic center had been transformed with cozy cafes and small stores. I parked my old but immaculately maintained Ford just off the main street and walked leisurely toward the bookstore. Pages and Bindings was a small independent bookstore where I'd been a regular customer since it opened 15 years ago. Ashlyn had inherited my love of reading, and we often exchanged views on what we'd read during our rare meetings. The bell above the door jingled softly as I entered. Inside smelled of paper, coffee, and that special smell that only bookstores have, the smell of thousands of stories waiting to be read. "Curtis!" Eleanor, the store owner, smiled at me from behind the counter. "I haven't seen you in a while." "Good afternoon, Eleanor. I'm looking for a gift for my granddaughter." "Ashlyn's finished her master's degree, right? What's she doing now?" I felt a pang of embarrassment at not being able to answer that question accurately. Our conversations on the phone were often superficial. Not my fault, but because Paige and Vernon seemed to do everything they could to limit our communication. "She was studying English literature," I said, avoiding a direct answer. Eleanor nodded understandingly and led me to the contemporary literature section. I had a few new titles that might appeal to her. After half an hour of discussion, I chose a first edition novel by a young writer who had recently won a prestigious literary award. The book was beautifully designed and, according to Eleanor, touched on topics that should have interested Ashlyn. As Eleanor was wrapping the book in gift paper, I noticed a collection of poetry on the shelf that Martha had once read. It triggered a wave of memories of how family gatherings used to be. Martha had an amazing talent for turning ordinary days into special occasions. Father's Day under her was a real celebration. She always got up before me to make my favorite breakfast. Paige, still a child, would help her, and together they would carry the tray into the bedroom where I pretended to be asleep. Then there were homemade cards, awkward but touching gifts, picnics in the park. As Paige became a teenager, those traditions began to change. She became more and more distant, finding the company of her peers more appealing than that of her parents. But Martha always found a way to bring the family back together, if only for a few hours. She understood people, had a way with everyone. That's a gift I was deprived of. After Martha died, family gatherings became a formality. Paige married Vernon, Ashlyn was born, and we saw each other only on obligatory occasions. Christmas, Thanksgiving, sometimes birthdays. Father's Day was usually limited to a phone call or a card. "Here, Curtis." Eleanor's voice snapped me out of my memories. She held out a beautifully wrapped book to me. "I'm sure Ashlyn will appreciate your choice." I thanked her and, after paying, left the store. My next stop was the jewelry store. The book was nice, but I wanted to get Ashlyn something special, something that would remind her of Martha. Martha had left some of her jewelry, which I cherished. Among them was a silver necklace with a small sapphire, not too expensive but dainty. I wanted a jeweler to clean it and replace the clasp, which had become unreliable over time. The Silverstone jewelry store was on the same street as the bookstore. The owner, Harry, was my age, and we sometimes played chess in the city park. "Curtis!" he exclaimed when I entered. "What are you doing here?" I explained my request and took the necklace out of my pocket. Harry examined it carefully through the magnifying glass. "It's beautiful work," he nodded. "They don't make it like this anymore. Of course, I'll fix it. What time do you need it?" "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow's Father's Day, and I'm going to my daughter's house." Harry gave me a surprised look. He was one of the few people who knew about my complicated relationship with my family. "Okay, come by at 3 o'clock. Everything will be ready," he said, delicately not asking any questions. As I was leaving the store, my cell phone rang. "Paige's number," I answered, trying to make my voice sound cheerful. "Dad." Her tone was businesslike, without a hint of warmth. "I'm calling about tomorrow." "Yes, I remember, Paige. 5 o'clock. That's right. Listen," I was going to say. She paused for a moment like she was searching for words. "We're planning something special. A little party." "A party?" I interjected. It didn't fit my idea of a family dinner. "Yeah, we invited some friends and co-workers." Her voice became a little strained. "They want to meet you. That's weird." In all her years, Paige had never expressed a desire to introduce me to her friends. And why on Father's Day? "Also, Dad," she continued, "would you please wear something, presentable? Maybe that gray suit we gave you for Christmas 3 years ago? I remembered that suit. It was expensive, but not my style at all. Too fancy for a man of my age and position. I'd only worn it a couple times so as not to offend Paige." "Okay," I agreed, feeling the irritation building inside me. "Anything else?" "Yeah, about the presents." Her voice became even more strained. "You don't have to bring anything. Seriously, Dad, we have everything." It wasn't the first time Paige had refused my gifts. It was like accepting something from me meant she had to admit some kind of dependency. "I already bought a small gift for Ashlyn," I said firmly. "Dad, really, you shouldn't—" "Paige." My tone left no room for objection. "I have the right to give gifts to my granddaughter." There was a pause, then Paige sighed. "Okay, but nothing expensive, okay? And Dad—" She hesitated again. "Vernon would like to talk to you, alone, tomorrow. That's it." Things were starting to make sense now. "About what, if it's no secret?" "He'll tell me," Paige answered quickly. "It's, financial." Of course it was. What other question could Vernon have for me? It wasn't baseball he wanted to talk about. "All right, Paige. I'll see you tomorrow." I ended the conversation, feeling the good mood fading. The invitation, the special party, the upcoming conversation with Vernon, it was all adding up to a bad picture. Instead of driving straight home, I decided to stop by a small cafe near the center. I needed some time to gather my thoughts. Laura's Cafe was another one of my favorite places in Youngstown. It served the best apple pie in town and strong coffee that reminded me of the days of my youth when I worked building bridges and started each day with a thermos of the same strong drink. I had just placed my order when I heard a familiar voice. "Curtis?" What an unexpected meeting. Howard, my friend and neighbor, was standing at my table. He was dressed in a golf suit and looked like he had just returned from the course. "Howard." I nodded at the vacant chair across the table. "Would you like to join me?" He sat down, ordered his coffee, and turned to me with a conspiratorial smile. "Getting ready for tomorrow? I hear Paige is organizing something special. News travels fast in small towns." "Yeah, she invited me to dinner. Or a party, I'm not sure anymore." Howard took a sip of coffee and looked at me over the top of the cup. "You know, I probably shouldn't say this, but I've been waiting." Howard held a position on the board of directors of the bank where Vernon worked. If anyone knew about his financial affairs, it was Howard. "There are rumors in the bank," he finally continued, lowering his voice. "Nothing official, you know. But they say Vernon got into some risky investments, and not very successful." I wasn't surprised. Vernon was always looking to get rich quick, preferring risk to stability. "How serious?" Howard shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know exactly, but his department is under close scrutiny. And," he lowered his voice again, "some of the transactions are questionable." That was more serious. Questions in the banking world could mean anything from simple errors to financial fraud. Do you think that's why he wants to talk to me? I asked bluntly. Howard raised his eyebrows. He wants to talk to you? Well, it all makes sense now. He set the cup aside. Curtis, be careful. I know how much you love Ashlyn and I know you'd do anything for her. But don't let them manipulate you. I nodded. Howard was right. The last of my doubts were gone. The Father's Day invitation was definitely self-serving. Thanks for the warning, I said. I'll be on my guard. We talked a little more about more pleasant things, the upcoming golf tournament, the new exhibit at the City Museum, Howard's plans for his summer vacation. Then he looked at his watch and apologized. He had to get home. Left alone, I thought about tomorrow. Now that I knew what to expect, I had two options: to decline the invitation, citing ill health, or to go and face the situation head on. The first option was tempting. I could avoid an unpleasant conversation, avoid putting myself under stress, which at my age was undesirable. But it would also mean not seeing Ashlyn, whom I hadn't seen in months. The second option required courage and self-control. I had to go, knowing that I would probably be tried and used. But it gave me a chance to see my granddaughter and perhaps realize how serious Vernon's problems were. By the time I finished my coffee, the decision was made. I'm going, not for Paige or Vernon, but for Ashlyn, and to find out what was going on in my family. I paid my bill and left the cafe. It was the middle of the day. The sun was high in the sky. I decided to walk to the jewelry store, even though it meant putting extra strain on my knee. Movement helped me think. Walking through Youngstown brought back a new wave of memories. I remembered the town differently, bustling, full of life, with working steel mills employing thousands of people. Over time, industry declined. Many people left, but the city survived, transformed, and so did I. By the time I reached the jewelry store, I felt pleasantly tired. Harry, true to his word, had already finished the necklace. It shone like new, and the clasp was securely fastened. Well done, Harry, I thanked my friend and paid. Your granddaughter will love it, he said. And Curtis. He hesitated. Good luck tomorrow. I nodded gratefully. In a small town, everyone understood without words. On the way home, I stopped at the supermarket and bought groceries for dinner. Despite the upcoming party tomorrow, I preferred to cook myself rather than order delivery, as many of my peers did. At home, I carefully placed the gifts for Ashlyn on the living room table. The book and necklace were small but meaningful gifts. I wanted her to know that even if we rarely saw each other, I was always thinking of her. Then I pulled out the gray suit Paige wanted to see me in. It was really good quality, but I felt out of place in it, like I was wearing someone else's skin. But if that was the price of seeing Ashlyn, I was willing to pay it. I spent the evening reading a new book on the bridges of the world, a gift from Howard for my 78th birthday. Engineering had always remained a passion of mine, even after retirement. Before going to bed, I looked at Martha's picture again. Tomorrow is a big day, dear, I said quietly. It's a shame you won't be around. I could almost hear her reply, Be yourself, Curtis. Don't let them hurt you. Martha always knew how to find the right words. With that thought, I went to bed preparing for tomorrow. Whatever Paige and Vernon had planned, I was ready to face it with dignity. And most importantly, I would see Ashlyn. That was enough to make me go to this party, despite all my suspicions and misgivings. Father's Day was sunny and warm. I woke up early as usual and lay staring at the ceiling for a long time. Today I had a meeting with my family that I was both looking forward to and dreading. Despite suspicions of self-serving motives for the invitation, a part of me still hoped for a sincere reunion. I carefully shaved, combed my hair, and put on the very gray suit Paige had mentioned. The mirror reflected an older but still sturdy man with a straight back and clear eyes. The years had been kind to Martha and me. We'd both aged decently, maintaining sound minds and relatively good health until her last days. On the table in the hallway were gifts for Ashlyn, Martha's book and necklace, wrapped in elegant paper. I hoped they would bring her joy, unlike the awkwardness my gifts usually cause Paige. I decided to drive early to avoid possible traffic and not be late. Paige and Vernon's house was in one of Youngstown's upscale neighborhoods, a large two-story mansion with a manicured lawn and an ornamental fountain. Whenever I went there, I had mixed feelings, pride in my daughter's success and bitterness at the fact that her material well-being only widened the gap between us. As I drove up to the house, I noticed an unusual number of cars parked along the street. It seemed like Paige had invited a lot more people than I had expected. A little party, as she put it, promised to be quite crowded. I parked at the end of the street since there were no spaces closer and walked slowly toward the house, holding the bag of gifts. My knee was a little sore, foreshadowing a possible change in the weather, but overall I felt fine. The door was opened by Paige herself. She was dressed in an elegant blue dress, her hair styled in an elaborate updo, her makeup flawless. My daughter always knew how to impress. "Daddy," she smiled, strained, and lightly touched her cheek to my cheek in the semblance of a kiss. "You're early." "Hello, Paige," I smiled back. "I didn't want to be late." "Of course," she stepped back, letting me inside. Some of the guests had already arrived, and the rest would be here any minute. A small group of people had already gathered in the spacious living room, about 8 people, each with a glass in their hand. I recognized a couple of Vernon's co-workers and one of Paige's friends. The rest were unfamiliar to me. Vernon and Ashlyn weren't among them. "Let me introduce you to my father, Curtis Barlow," Paige announced, and everyone turned in my direction with polite smiles. I nodded and mumbled the standard greeting. It was obvious that I hadn't made it to a family dinner but to a social gathering, and my status at this event was still unclear to me. "Paige, where's Ashlyn?" I asked as the guests returned to their conversations. "She hasn't arrived yet," my daughter answered absently, glancing around the living room with a critical eye. "Dad, could you help me? Vernon's out of town and the guests are starting to arrive." "Sure." I put the bag of gifts on the small table in the corner. "What do you need me to do?" "You see, Vernon and I were thinking—" Paige hesitated, which was unusual for her. "We're having about 30 guests, and we need help with parking. There's limited space in the yard, and people don't always know how to park properly." It took me a moment to realize what she was getting at. "So, we were wondering if you could, help with that?" She finally made up her mind. "Just point out where to park the car. Keep things neat." I felt something cold curl up in my chest. My daughter invited me to Father's Day to work as a valet at her party. "Paige," I began, trying to remain calm, "did you invite me to be a caterer?" She rolled her eyes, a gesture that had always annoyed me since she was a teenager. "Don't be so dramatic, Dad. I'm just asking for a little help. After all, this is a family event." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Paige threw me a pleading look. "Please, Dad, just an hour, no more." I held back the words I was about to say and nodded silently. I didn't want to start a scandal in front of strangers. Besides, I was still hoping to see Ashlyn. I spent the next hour in the driveway showing arriving guests where to park. Most of them gave me surprised looks. A gray-haired man in an expensive suit doing the parking lot attendant's job must have looked ridiculous, but no one said anything. Some even thanked me, mistaking me for a hired hand. When the traffic died down, I returned to the house, feeling tired and growing irritated. The living room and dining room were now full of people, loud conversations and laughter creating a buzz that gave me a headache. I finally noticed Ashlyn talking to a group of young people by the window. She looked beautiful, in a simple green dress, her brown hair loose, so much like Martha when she was young that my heart sank. I headed toward her, but was intercepted by Vernon. Curtis, my son-in-law, a tall man with a budding bald spot and an always smug smile, clapped me on the shoulder with a familiarity I'd never encouraged. "Glad you could make it." "Vernon," I nodded. "Interesting interpretation of a family dinner." He grinned, not noticing or ignoring my sarcasm. "One has to keep up with the times. Father's Day is celebrated in a big way these days. Thanks for your help with the parking lot, by the way. That was a big help." I was about to reply, but Vernon had already turned to a passing waiter with a tray of drinks. Yes, there was even a hired staff, but Paige preferred to use her father to do the rough work. "Wait a minute," I called out to my son-in-law. "Paige said you wanted to talk to me." Vernon turned around, his face frozen for a moment, then he strained a smile. "Yes, but not right now. Later, when the guests have dispersed. Family business, you know." With those words, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving me alone in the middle of the noisy party. I finally made my way over to Ashlyn. Her face brightened when she saw me. "Grandpa!" She threw herself around my neck with a genuine warmth that was so rare in this house. "I'm so glad to see you." "Me too, sweetheart," I hugged her, feeling some of the tension go away. "You look beautiful." "You too," she pulled back, looking me over. "That suit really suits you." We talked about her life after college, her plans for the future. Ashlyn was always easy to talk to me, without the strain that characterized my conversations with Paige. Before I could hand her the presents, Paige interrupted us. "Daddy," she came over with an empty tray. "Could you help in the kitchen? The waiters are running out of time to serve drinks." Ashlyn gave her mother a puzzled look. "Mom, really? Grandpa is a guest, not an attendant." "Ashlyn, stay out of this," Paige said. "The adults are talking." I saw my granddaughter tense up, but she didn't say anything. "It's okay, Ashlyn," I said calmly. "I don't mind helping." I took the tray and followed Paige into the kitchen where a set of champagne glasses was waiting for me. "Take these out, please," Paige said in an unapologetic tone. "And be careful. These glasses are crystal, and they cost a fortune." I silently took the tray and walked back into the living room. Humiliation burned inside me, but I didn't let it show. Many years on the job had taught me to hide my emotions when necessary. For the next 2 hours, I worked as a waiter at my own daughter's Father's Day party, serving drinks, cleaning up empty glasses, even helping with serving appetizers. Ashlyn tried to intervene a few times, but Paige sent her off with some errand each time. By 6 p.m., the guests had moved into the dining room where a sumptuous table was set. I expected to be allowed to join them now, but Paige directed me to a small table in the corner where an older woman was already seated. Vernon's aunt, as I remembered. "You'll stay here," Paige said, as if doing me a favor. There weren't enough seats at the main table. I glanced around the spacious dining room where I could easily fit a few more people, but I didn't say anything. Ashlyn sat far away from me between 2 young men, looking unhappy. The dinner was an atmosphere of intense merriment, the kind of strained laughter and loud talking that characterizes corporate parties. I ate in silence, exchanging occasional phrases with my neighbor, who seemed as unhappy with her situation as I was. After dessert, Vernon stood up with a glass in his hand. "Friends," he began, and the murmur of voices died down. "I want to thank everyone for coming to share this special day with us Father's Day." I felt hope welling up inside me. Maybe this day was about me after all. Maybe Vernon would say something warm now, and all this humiliation would turn out to be part of some strange plan. "Fathers play an important role in our lives," Vernon continued. "They teach us how to be strong, how to be successful, how to overcome difficulties." He raised his glass in my direction, and I nodded slightly in response. "And today, I want to tell you a story about my father." Vernon smiled, and something in that smile made me wary. "A story about the importance of retiring in time to recognize that your time has passed." A chuckle ran through the room. I stiffened, feeling the blood drain from my face. "You all know Curtis," Vernon waved in my direction. "My beautiful wife's father, former engineer, and, let's just say, a good example of what happens when a man holds on to the past too long." The laughter was louder now. I saw Ashlyn straighten up, her face pale. "Last Christmas," Vernon continued, getting into the swing of things, "Curtis tried to explain to us why the bridge he'd designed 40 years ago was still standing. And you know what the funny thing is? He forgot the name of that bridge. That was a lie. I never forgot the names of my bridges. I could tell the story of every one of them in great detail." "And last week," Paige interjected, coming up beside her husband, "Dad called me 3 times to ask me when Father's Day was. 3 times in one day." Another lie. I hadn't called Paige in weeks before her invitation. "But we love him," Paige faked a doting smile, "even with his peculiarities." The guests laughed, some throwing sympathetic glances at me. I sat as still as a statue, not letting a single emotion show on my face. "So tonight," Vernon raised his glass higher, "I drink to all the fathers who know when it's time to hand over the reins to the younger generation. And to those who take care of their parents, no matter what," Paige added with fake modesty. Everyone raised their glasses except for me and Ashlyn, who stood up abruptly. "This is disgusting," she said loudly, and the room fell silent. "You invited Grandpa to Father's Day, made him work as a servant, and now you're making fun of him?" Paige turned pale, her smile strained. "Ashlyn, please sit down. We're just kidding." "No, Mom, it's not a joke. This is cruel and unfair. Grandpa worked his whole life to provide for you. He helped you buy this house, paid for my college, and this is how you thank him." Vernon walked over to Ashlyn and put his hand on her shoulder, squeezing a little harder than necessary. "Honey, you're getting a little too emotional. Maybe you should get some fresh air." "Get your hands off me." Ashlyn shook off his palm. "Grandpa," she turned to me, "let's get out of here. Now." I stood up, feeling strangely calm. The storm of emotion inside me had subsided, giving way to cold determination. "Ashlyn," I said quietly, "thank you, but I'm fine." I turned to the guests, many of whom looked embarrassed. "I apologize for this little incident. My granddaughter is very thoughtful, but sometimes she doesn't get the jokes." I allowed myself a smile. As an engineer, I'm used to accuracy, so I'd like to make a small correction. The bridge Vernon was referring to is called the Youngstown Veterans Memorial Bridge, built in 1969, and it's still considered one of the most reliable in the state. There was silence. Then one of the guests coughed awkwardly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to present a gift to my granddaughter." I headed toward the table where I'd left the package. Paige and Vernon exchanged quick glances. It was obvious the evening wasn't going their way. "Maybe later, Dad?" Paige tried to intervene. "We were just about to—" "It'll just take a minute," I interrupted her in a tone of voice that brooked no objection. The tone I'd used when I'd been in charge of building bridges, which, as it turned out, I hadn't forgotten. I handed Ashlyn the book and the small box containing the necklace. Her eyes filled with tears when she opened the latter. "It's Grandma's," she whispered. "Yes," I nodded. "She would have wanted you to have it." Ashlyn hugged me, ignoring the awkward silence around her. "Thank you, Grandpa." After that, the party went on as usual, but the atmosphere changed. The guests began to leave earlier than planned, many coming up to me to shake my hand and quietly apologize, even though they hadn't technically done anything wrong. By 9 o'clock, the house was empty. It was just me, Paige, Vernon, and Ashlyn. Paige avoided my gaze. Vernon looked annoyed, and Ashlyn looked determined. "I'm taking Grandpa home," she declared. "No need," Vernon objected. "Curtis and I haven't talked yet." "About what?" Ashlyn asked suspiciously. "Family matters," Vernon said. Not your concern. I put my hand on my granddaughter's shoulder. It's all right, Ashlyn. I'm perfectly capable of getting home on my own. And yes, I need to talk to your father. She hesitated but then nodded. Okay, but I'll call you tomorrow. After she left, there was a heavy silence in the room. Paige began to gather the dishes, clattering the plates loudly. So, I turned to Vernon. You wanted to talk. He nodded, avoiding my gaze. Yeah, but maybe this isn't the best time. On the contrary, I sat down in the chair and gestured for him to sit across from me. It's a good time. Vernon reluctantly lowered himself into the chair. Paige continued to rattle the dishes in the kitchen, obviously listening to our conversation. The thing is, Curtis, Vernon began, nervously adjusting his tie, I've run into some financial difficulties. Temporary, of course. What kind of difficulties? He faltered. An investment I made haven't quite lived up to expectations. And I need a little help. A loan, if you will. On very favorable terms for you. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he really thought I'd give him a dime after today. How big a favor? He named an amount that made me inwardly whistle. For a little help, it was pretty impressive. That's serious money, Vernon. What do you need it for? I told you, it's an investment, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I nodded, pretending to consider his request. I need time to think about it. Vernon was obviously disappointed, but he tried not to show it. Of course. Just don't take too long. The opportunity might float away. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I'll get back to you in a couple days. Vernon walked me to the door, his handshake moist and uncertain. Paige never came out to say goodbye. Instead of leaving right away, I decided to walk around the neighborhood a bit to clear my head. The humiliation I'd experienced today needed some reflection. So did Vernon's financial problems. I walked down the quiet street, enjoying the cool evening air. When I got back to my car, I noticed that the light in Paige and Vernon's house was still on in the second-floor study. The window was ajar, and I could hear Vernon's voice, harsh, agitated. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but his next words pinned me in place. I tried, damn it, he was saying to someone on the phone. The old man didn't bite. Maybe he suspected something. Pause. No, I can't get that money out of the bank. After the audit, I'm already suspected. If I take any more, I won't just be fired, I'll go to jail. Another pause, then Vernon spoke more softly, and I had to strain to hear. Yes, the scheme still works, but we need more capital. 3 more months and we'll be in the black. Just find me that money and I'll pay it all back with interest. At that moment, I heard Paige's voice asking who he was talking to, and the window closed. I stood still, thinking about what I'd heard. So, Vernon wasn't just having financial difficulties. He seemed to be involved in some kind of illegal scheme. And he wanted to use my money to get out of the hole he dug himself. At that moment, something in me changed. The cold rage I'd been holding back all evening turned to steely determination. They'd humiliated me on my own holiday, used me as free labor, ridiculed me in front of strangers, and now they were trying to drag me into their dubious affairs. That's enough. It was time to put an end to this. I got in the car and started the engine, a plan of action already forming in my head. A plan that would put an end to the disrespect and manipulation. A plan that would make Paige and Vernon realize that their actions had consequences. I've built many bridges in my long life. Now, it was time to destroy the bridge that bound me to people who didn't deserve to be called family. I awoke at dawn, feeling an unusual clarity of thought. The night had brought not only rest, but a clear understanding of what needed to be done. Years as an engineer had taught me one important principle. Any construction requires careful planning, calculating all the loads and anticipating possible weaknesses. The plan that formed in my head was as precise as the blueprints of the bridges I had once designed. No hatred, no revenge for revenge's sake, only cold calculation and the restoration of justice. The first item on my list was to meet with Howard. I called him right after breakfast and invited him for coffee. He agreed to meet in an hour at our usual place, a small cafe near the center of town. Laura's was almost empty in the morning hours. Howard and I took a table in the corner that overlooked the street. My old friend looked concerned when I started to tell him about last night. "Did they use you as a servant? For Father's Day?" Howard shook his head, not hiding his indignation. "Vernon had the nerve to ask you for money afterward." "That's right." I sipped my coffee. And from the conversation I'd overheard, it sounded like some kind of financial scheme, probably illegal. Howard frowned, tapping his fingers on the table, a gesture he always made when he was thinking hard. "I knew Vernon was in trouble, but I didn't realize it was so serious," he said finally. "There are indeed rumors at the bank. His department showed unusual results, too good to be true. This has attracted the attention of the auditors." "I need your help, Howard." I leaned closer. "Not for myself, but for Ashlyn. She's the only one in this family who deserves protection." Howard raised his eyebrows. "What are you up to, Curtis?" "Nothing illegal," I assured him. "I just want to make sure that if Vernon's involved in something dirty, he doesn't get away with it, and that my money wouldn't be used to cover up his schemes." Howard looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do. After all, I'm on the board of directors for a reason. If there's something fishy going on, we need to know." We agreed that Howard would gently bring up the issue of Vernon's department review at the next board meeting, not naming specific names but directing attention in the right direction. After meeting with Howard, I headed to my attorney's office. Harris Fleming had handled my cases for over 20 years and was one of the few people I trusted completely. Harris's office was in an old building downtown. His secretary, Mrs. Benson, smiled welcomingly when she saw me. "Mr. Barlow, what a pleasant surprise. Mr. Fleming's busy right now, but he'll be back in 15 minutes. Will you wait?" "Of course, Mrs. Benson." I sat down in a comfortable chair in the reception area and picked up a magazine from the table. Exactly 15 minutes later, the door to Harris's office opened and an elderly man came out. Harris saw him out and smiled broadly when he saw me. "Curtis, I didn't expect to see you. Something urgent?" "I need to make changes to the will," I answered simply. Harris's face became serious. He invited me into the office and closed the door tightly. "What's wrong?" he asked when we sat down. "Is there a health problem?" "No, there's nothing wrong with my health. It was just time to reconsider some decisions." I explained my new wishes to Harris, to exclude Paige and Vernon from the will entirely, leaving all of Ashlyn's assets and savings, with the stipulation that she would have access to the inheritance only when she reached the age of 30. Until then, everything would be administered by a trust under the direction of Harris himself. "Quite a radical change," the lawyer remarked, making notes. "May I ask what was the reason?" I briefly recounted last night and my suspicions about Vernon's financial dealings. "I understand," Harris nodded. "I'll prepare all the documents. But let me give you some advice as a friend, not just as a lawyer. Don't make hasty decisions on emotion." "I'm not emotional, Harris," I replied calmly. Never in my life had I thought as clearly as I did now. After Harris, I went home, but not to rest. I had some investigating to do. I had made many acquaintances and connections over the years as an engineer, and some of them might come in handy now. I called Marcus Delaney, a former colleague who now worked as a financial security consultant. Marcus had always owed me a favor. I had once helped him get an important contract that would determine the rest of his career. "Marcus, I need a favor," I said after a brief exchange of pleasantries. "Information on the financial transactions of a bank employee." "That doesn't sound legal, Curtis." I could hear the wariness in Marcus's voice. Nothing illegal. Just check publicly available sources. See if his name was involved in any shady transactions. I'm worried about my granddaughter. She's engaged to this man's son. A little lie for the greater good. Ashlyn wasn't engaged, but Marcus didn't need to know the whole truth. Okay, give me a name and some time. I dictated Vernon's information and thanked Marcus. Then I made another call to an old buddy from the IRS who was now retired but kept in touch with his former colleagues. I told him a little more, but still not the whole truth. I simply expressed concern about some of my son-in-law's financial dealings and asked to see if there had been any investigations into him. By evening, the plan began to take shape. I decided to act on all fronts at once: the bank, the IRS, the legal documents. Vernon and Paige needed to feel the consequences of their actions from all sides. The next morning, I met with Howard again. He brought some interesting news. The board was already planning an audit of Vernon's department, he reported. Too good a performance in the face of a general market downturn had aroused suspicion. I just pushed the process along a bit. When will it happen? Within a week, the audit will begin. But, Curtis, Howard put his hand on my shoulder, if he's really involved in something dirty, the consequences will be serious. Are you ready for that? I wondered. Was I prepared for the possibility that my son-in-law might lose his job or even be investigated? That it would affect Paige and maybe even Ashlyn? Yes, I finally answered. Justice had to be served no matter how bitter it was. After lunch, I drove to the bank where Vernon worked. It was a solid building in the business district of Youngstown. I wore my best suit, not the gray one Paige had imposed on me, but the classic navy blue one I always felt confident in. At the entrance, I said I wanted to open a large deposit and would like to speak to the manager. I was escorted into a spacious office where I was greeted by Philip Grand, the bank's general manager and Vernon's immediate superior. Mr. Barlow, he shook my hand. What can I do for you? I'm considering depositing a substantial amount of money, I said in a businesslike tone. I'd like to know about your terms for VIP clients. Grande perked up. Banks always welcome large depositors. Of course, we offer special conditions for such clients. Let me tell you about our programs. We talked for about half an hour. I asked knowledgeable questions, demonstrating my understanding of financial mechanisms. Grand was clearly impressed. You're very knowledgeable, Mr. Barlow. Years of experience, I smiled modestly. By the way, I hear you have Vernon Hammond working for you. He's married to my daughter. Grand's face changed slightly, though he did his best to hide it. Yes, Vernon heads one of our departments. He must be a great employee, huh? I continued casually. He's got a good record, Grand replied with restraint. That's good to hear. In that case, I think I can entrust my funds to your bank. But first I'd like to meet with Vernon to discuss the details. Since he's family, why not do business through him? Now Grand's face was clearly worried. Vernon is in a slightly different line of work. I'd recommend working with our private banking specialists. Oh yeah? I pretended to be surprised. I thought he was in a pretty senior position. He is, but Grande's a little slow on the uptake. His department is currently undergoing a routine review and we're trying not to overburden him with additional responsibilities. I see, I nodded. Well, I trust your judgment. When can we start the paperwork? We agreed to meet in 2 days. Of course, I had no intention of depositing any funds in that bank, but the meeting served its purpose. I saw Grand's reaction to the mention of Vernon's name and received confirmation that the check had indeed begun. Leaving the bank, I accidentally ran into Vernon in the lobby. His face expressed extreme surprise and alarm. Curtis, what are you doing here? Financial matters, I answered calmly. I was just talking to Mr. Grand about the possibility of placing some funds in your bank. Vernon turned pale. You didn't tell him anything about me? Only that you're my son-in-law, I shrugged. Why? Shouldn't have mentioned it? No, just... He looked around nervously. It's not a good time for new clients. Internal reorganization, you know? I totally understand, I patted him on the shoulder. I won't keep you. By the way, about that loan you were talking about, I'm afraid I have to decline. My financial policy doesn't allow for family loans. Too much trouble later. Vernon's face turned ash gray. He mumbled something unintelligible and hurried away. When I got home, I sat down at my computer and drafted an anonymous letter to the FDIC. In it, I outlined the facts I knew and my suspicions about Vernon's financial dealings, not forgetting to mention the overheard telephone conversation. The letter was dry, businesslike, without emotion, just information that might be of interest to the regulatory authorities. After sending the letter, I pulled out of the safe a folder with the deeds to Paige and Vernon's house. Little did anyone know, but legally, I owned the house. When they bought it, they didn't have enough credit history to qualify for a favorable mortgage. I made a down payment and deeded the house to myself, with a verbal agreement that I would later remortgage it to them. Paige and Vernon made monthly payments to me, which I then transferred to the bank against the mortgage. Over the years, I had somehow forgotten about this arrangement. They had been paying faithfully. I had been faithfully transferring the money to the bank, and everyone was happy. But now I decided to exercise my legal right. The next day I met with Harris again. We discussed the situation with the house and he suggested a few options. Legally, you have every right to dispose of the property, he said, but there is a moral issue. The moral side was crossed when they humiliated me in front of strangers, I replied. I'm not going to throw them out on the street immediately. I just want them to realize that everything has a price, including disrespecting their parents. Harris sighed but didn't argue. He prepared the necessary documents for the sale of the house, which I could use at any time. That same day, Marcus called. His voice sounded excited. Curtis, I found something interesting. Your bank teller is involved in some questionable transactions. Nothing overtly illegal, but there are indications of manipulation of records, perhaps to hide losses or create the appearance of success. How serious is this? Serious enough to cost him his career if word got out to the bank's management. I thanked Marcus and asked him to send all the information in an official form to Howard. As a member of the bank's board of directors, he was authorized to receive such information. I spent the next 2 days finalizing my plan, met with a notary public to officially change the will, visited my financial advisor to restructure the investments and make them unavailable for potential claims from Paige and Vernon, called Ashlyn and invited her to lunch the following Saturday without mentioning what was going on. She wasn't to be caught between two fires. All the while, I acted calmly and methodically, without haste or gloating. It wasn't revenge in the usual sense of the word. Rather, it was a rebalancing, a correction of the warped structure that our family relationship had become. By the end of the week, everything was ready. The will had been changed, the letter to the FDIC had been sent, the paperwork for the sale of the house had been prepared, the bank audit of Vernon's department was in full swing. All that was left was to wait for all these lines to converge at one point. Saturday morning, I got a call from Howard. Curtis, his voice sounded serious. It started. The board has received the auditor's report. The results, not in Vernon's favor. He's being summoned to a hearing on Monday. I understand, I replied. Thanks for letting me know. Are you sure you want to go through with this? It's not too late to stop it, I wondered. Was I ready to see my daughter and son-in-law's lives ruined? Was my decision too cruel? But then I remembered their faces as they mocked me in front of the guests. I remembered how I was used as free labor on a day that was supposed to be about respect and appreciation. I remembered all the years of neglect and barely concealed contempt. Yes, I said firmly, I want justice to be done. After my talk with Howard, I went out into the garden. It was a clear, sunny day, perfect for outdoor work. I put on my gloves and began pruning roses, an activity that always brought me peace. Martha loved roses. She said they teach us an important life lesson. Sometimes we need to cut back diseased and weak branches so that the plant can thrive. At times, this process seems cruel, but in the long run, it is beneficial. That's exactly what I was doing now, pruning the sick branches of our family so that the healthy ones could grow and thrive. Ashlyn deserved a better future than what awaited her under the influence of parents like Paige and Vernon. By late afternoon, I finished my work in the garden and sat on the veranda with a cup of tea, looking out at the setting sun. There was a strange calmness inside me. I had done everything I could to remedy the situation. Now, all I had to do was wait for my actions to bear fruit, and it didn't take long. The very next day, Sunday, my phone rang. It was Paige. Her voice sounded worried. "Dad, can we talk? It's important." "Sure," I answered. "Come over if you want." "We'll be there in an hour," she said and hung up. I put the kettle on and prepared myself for what was going to be a difficult conversation. But I was ready. The bridges I had built all my life had always stood the test of nature and time. Now it was up to me to stand up to it. The silence in my house seemed deafening. It had been 3 days since Paige and Vernon had come over to talk. Back then, they didn't know about the impending storm yet. They just wanted to try again to beg me for money. I refused, keeping my cool and not revealing my plans. Vernon was annoyed. Paige was disappointed, but they left, unaware that their world was about to fall apart. Today, Wednesday, everything was about to come to a head. I sat in my office, going through old photographs, the only evidence that we once had a real family. Martha holding newborn Paige in her arms, Paige on graduation day, our last picture together before Paige's wedding. When did it all go wrong? A phone call interrupted my musings. It was Howard. "Curtis, it's done." His voice sounded serious. "The board of directors had just finished an emergency meeting. Vernon has been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. The bank has also frozen all of his accounts because it is suspected that the money may have been obtained illegally." I took a deep breath. The first domino had fallen. "How did he take the news?" "Not too well," Howard grinned. "First he tried to deny it, then he threatened lawyers. But when they showed him the documents, you should have seen the look on his face." "I'm sorry it had to come to that," I said sincerely. Despite everything, I didn't feel any gloating, just tiredness and the strange calmness of a man doing what he had to do. "Are you sure you want to go on?" Howard asked. "It's not too late to stop." "No," I answered firmly. "Justice must be done." After talking to Howard, I called Harris and gave him the green light to send a formal notice to Paige and Vernon to vacate the house within 30 days. As the legal owner of the property, I had every right to do so. "The papers will be delivered this afternoon," Harris confirmed. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" "More than ready," I replied. They'd chosen this path. The last thing I needed to do was call Ashlyn. I didn't want her to find out from her parents and jump to the wrong conclusions. She deserved to know the truth from me. Ashlyn answered after the second dial tone, her voice sounding wary. "Grandpa, is something wrong?" "I need to tell you something, sweetheart," I began. "You may be hearing some unpleasant things about me." "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. About Father's Day, about the conversation I'd overheard, about my actions afterward. I didn't try to make excuses or sugarcoat my motives. I simply stated the facts. Ashlyn was silent for a while, and I was afraid she was going to hang up. Finally, she spoke. "I knew something was wrong. Mom and Dad have been weird the last few days. Dad locked himself in his office all the time. Mom was walking around like she was on pins and needles." She was quiet. "I'm sorry they did that to you, Grandpa." Me too, sweetheart. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, my door is always open to you. If you need a place to stay or any other help, I'm here. Thank you, her voice trembled. Yeah, I need to think about all of this. Of course you do. Take as much time as you need. After talking to Ashlyn, I felt strangely relieved. Whatever happened next, I was ready. And if I lost my relationship with my daughter forever, well, it was already lost. I spent the rest of the day in the garden, working on a bed of perennials that Martha had planted years ago. Those flowers came back every year, as if to remind me that some things can stand the test of time. That evening I was sitting on the veranda with a book when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. The engine roared, as if the driver was purposely showing his annoyance, then abruptly stopped. The door slammed shut. I didn't need clairvoyance to realize who had arrived. Putting the book down, I waited quietly for the heavy footsteps to reach the veranda. Paige looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually flawless makeup was sloppily applied, her hair gathered into a sloppy ponytail. She didn't knock or ring the bell, just swung the door open and stormed inside. "How could you?" Her voice was full of rage. "How could you do that to your own daughter?" I slowly stood up. "Hello, Paige. Would you like to sit down? Have some tea?" "Tea?" She laughed, but it wasn't funny. "You ruined our lives and now you're offering me tea." "I didn't ruin anyone's life," I replied calmly. Vernon made the decisions that led to his current situation. And as for the house, it was always mine. You knew that. "It was a family pact," she was almost shouting. "You promised the house would be ours." "Yes, I did. And you promised to be a loving daughter. We both failed to keep our promises." Paige froze as if I'd hit her. Then she sank slowly into her chair, suddenly losing all her fervor. "Vernon lost his job," she said quietly. "They're saying that he's been manipulating the accounts, hiding losses, that he might be in trouble with the law." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied sincerely. "But I can't say I'm surprised." "Our accounts are frozen," she continued, staring into the space in front of her. "Every single one of them. We don't even have money for groceries. What about your job? You always prided yourself on your independence." Paige grimaced. "My paycheck. It doesn't even cover half of our expenses. And now this house." She looked up at me. "Why, Dad? Why did you do it?" I stared at her for a long time, trying to see in this tormented woman the little girl I had once carried in my arms, who I used to read bedtime stories to and wipe away tears when she fell off her bike. "Do you remember Father's Day?" I finally asked. "What's that got to do with it?" "Remember how you made me park your guest cars? How I served drinks and cleared the table? How you and Vernon made fun of me in front of everyone, telling false stories about my dementia?" Paige looked away. "Those were just jokes. You took it too seriously." "No, Paige. It was humiliation, deliberate and cruel, and it was the final straw after years of neglect and disrespect." "So this is revenge?" She grinned bitterly. "How childish, Daddy." "Call it whatever you want. I prefer the term consequences. Every action has consequences, Paige. You and Vernon have lived too long as if that rule doesn't apply to you." She jumped to her feet, her eyes burning with anger. "You can't do this! We're your family!" "Family?" I shook my head. "Family doesn't humiliate each other. A family doesn't use each other for money. A family respects and supports each of its members, even if it doesn't always agree with their decisions." "You're ruining our lives over one bad holiday?" She flailed her arms. "That's insane." "Not because of one holiday, Paige. Because of years of me being nothing more than an ATM and a potential inheritance to you. When you only called me when you needed something. When you didn't even invite me to Ashlyn's graduation because I didn't fit the concept." Paige bit her lip. That fact had clearly caught her off guard. She didn't know what I knew about prom. You had a bad knee, she mumbled. We didn't want to tire you out. Don't lie, Paige. At least not now. She lowered her head, then raised it sharply, as if a new thought had occurred to her. Okay. Her voice became businesslike. What do you want? An apology. I apologize. Vernon and I did wrong. We shouldn't have used you as a servant and made jokes about your age. It was disrespectful. Is that enough? I shook my head, smiling sadly. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about apologizing, Paige. It's about genuine remorse and a change in behavior. And you're only apologizing because you're in a difficult position and need my help. She gritted her teeth, clearly holding back her anger. What do you want, Dad? Just say it. I don't want anything, Paige. What's done is done. Vernon will be held accountable for his financial shenanigans. You'll have to vacate the house. My will has been changed. You and Vernon are no longer in it. Her face has gone pale. You disinherited us? I have. Everything will go to Ashlyn when she reaches the age of 30. Until then, the trust will manage everything. You can't do that, she raised her voice again. We'll challenge it in court. We'll prove you're incompetent. You can try, I shrugged. But my lawyer made sure the paperwork was impeccable. Besides, it's hardly worth it for your husband to draw additional law enforcement attention to himself in his current situation. Paige looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe it was the first time she saw me not as a source of money or a burden, but as a man who could stand up for himself. What shall we do? She asked at last, and for the first time there was something like real desperation in her voice. We have no money. There won't be a house soon. Vernon could go to jail. I sighed. Despite everything, she was still my daughter. Part of me wanted to reach out, to give her another chance. But the other part knew. If I did that, nothing would change. They would see it as weakness and continue to manipulate me. You're going to have to start over, Paige. Find a place to live within your means. Maybe get an extra job. Do what millions of people do every day. Live within your means. You're really going to leave us with nothing? Her voice was shaking. Your only daughter? Not nothing, Paige. You have a job. You have an education. You have health and experience. That's more than most people have. She was silent for a long, long time. Then she asked quietly, What about Ashlyn? You got her into this war. Ashlyn can move in with me if she wants to, I answered. I have plenty of room. I'll pay for the rest of her education and help her get back on her feet. She is the only one in your family who has always treated me with genuine respect and love. Are you trying to turn my daughter against me? Paige's voice was back to an angry tone. No, Paige. I'm just offering her shelter from the storm you and Vernon have brought upon yourselves. The decision is hers to make. Paige stood up. Her shoulders slumped as if a huge weight had been placed on them. You're going to regret this, she said, but her voice was no longer as confident as before. When you're alone in that big, empty house, you'll regret it. Maybe, I agreed, but I'd rather be alone than in a fake relationship based on self-interest and manipulation. She headed for the door, then stopped and turned around. You know, Mom would never have approved of what you did. It was a final blow calculated to hurt, and it hit the mark. I felt something tighten in my chest at the thought of Martha. You're right, I said quietly. She was better than me, kinder, more tolerant. She probably would have given you another chance. I looked Paige straight in the eye. But she would never have approved of the way you treated me all those years ago. Paige didn't say anything back. She just turned and walked out, slamming the door. I remained standing in the middle of the living room, listening to her car engine start, the tires rustling on the gravel of the driveway as the sound gradually faded into the distance. Then I went to the window and stared out at the empty street for a long time. Martha was looking at me from the picture, and I thought I saw understanding, not judgment, in her eyes. She always said that sometimes you have to make hard decisions for the long-term good, that sometimes you have to let go of something in order to gain something else. Today, I let go of the illusion of a family I never had, and in a strange way, it brought me peace rather than bitterness. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Perhaps Ashlyn would decide to stay with her parents. Perhaps Vernon would escape the serious consequences of his financial shenanigans. Maybe Paige would find a way around my legal maneuvers. But none of that mattered in this moment. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from manipulation, free from guilt, free from the constant need to conform to other people's expectations, free to be myself. Curtis Barlow, 78 years old, a former civil engineer, a man who spent his life building bridges to connect the banks of rivers, but never got around to building a bridge to connect him to his own daughter. And that was okay. Not all bridges can or should be built. Some faults are too deep, some currents are too strong. Sometimes it's better to recognize that and move on. I returned to the veranda, sat in my favorite chair, and cracked open a book. The evening was quiet, the air filled with the scent of blooming roses. Somewhere in the distance a bird sang. Life went on, and it was still beautiful no matter what. And if Ashlyn decides to accept my offer, if she wants to stay here, to start a new chapter of her life without the shadow of parental manipulation, well, my doors will always be open to her. But it would have to be her decision, her choice. I wasn't going to force or manipulate anyone like they had done to me. I turned the page of the book, but my thoughts were far away. I was thinking about the bridges I had built in my life, about the people who crossed them every day without even thinking about the person whose calculations and plans made it possible, about how sometimes the most seemingly sturdy structures turn out to be the most vulnerable if the foundations aren't laid correctly. A family is also a kind of bridge, and ours, unfortunately, was built on the sand of deceit and self-interest. No wonder it has not stood the test of time. But perhaps it's not too late to build a new one, with Ashlyn, on a solid foundation of sincerity and mutual respect. A bridge that will withstand all storms and floods. Time will tell. In the meantime, for now, I just enjoyed the peace I'd been denied for so long. The peace of a man who had finally found the strength to say, enough, and take his life into his own hands.